Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Logically Faithful, where we are engaging culture redemptively and dealing with suffering productively, using primary evidence, apologetics, theology, science, and anything else we can get our hands on to analyze the issues in a robust, logical, and evidential fashion. I have a special guest today, Pastor Ron Citlau. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Khaldun. It's so great to be here.
This has been long in becoming, so I'm glad it's finally materialized.
Yeah, I'm so excited. This is going to be like the lunches we have.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are a former drug addict, broken and lost is how you describe it. You wrecked your life, and then the incarnate one, Jesus, incarnate of the Son of God, found me, you said. In his kindness, he brought me to a good church, led me through some good friends, and began to rebuild my life. It's been 20 years, you're totally a new person. These days, you're a senior pastor here at Calvary Church, ordained Reformed Church America, Master of Divinity from Western Seminary, and you're the author of 2 major books, Compassion Without Compromise, How to Love Your Gay Friends Without Losing the Truth. Whoa, that's a tough one. You have to deal with those, don't you?
Yeah.
Hot potatoes, and Hope for the Same-Sex Attracted. You've been married to Amy for 16 years, is it? No?
Well, it's getting 17. More. It's, I think it's 18.
And you have 4 amazing boys, just full of energy.
Full of energy.
Yeah, well, I'm proud to have you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I want to deal today with the primary topic of marriage. So just in the news today, the Supreme Court Justice Amy, caught her name. Anyway, she was just nominated.
Yeah, the nominee. Yep.
Yeah, she had a family, a multiracial family, and she was called a colonialist, a white supremacist, and a backward thinker for believing that marriage would have the husband as the head of the family.
Yeah.
Of course, anybody on the other side of the spectrum would have probably done the same if somebody was coming in from the liberal side.
Yeah.
So these are things that are normal in the political spectrum, sadly. But let's deal with that issue. Right head on, marriage. Why is it such a contentious issue, and why is it so important to you?
Well, it's important because it has been foundational to our civilization for the last several thousand years. In every major civilization, at the core of it is this union between a man and a woman, in which every person comes through, whether that union is broken or whole. And it has been not a building block, but the building block of what we live in today. And so that is a contentious idea is befuddling to me. Because how else would you form a society? What pairing or unit would you bring together that will bring life into it and raise that life in a way that is secure and productive and good? There is no other way.
The very union of the man and the woman, the masculine and the feminine, seems to indicate that as they form bonds together, and whether it's romantic or social, sociological. That's in every culture, in every nation on the planet.
Yep.
But didn't the institution of marriage start in a Judeo-Christian context?
Right. The covenantal idea that we have is built upon, it's built upon the idea of who God is and the Judeo-Christian God. And that God himself is a community of Father, Son, and Spirit. And there's a Herman Bavinck, who's a Reformed theologian. He pulls from that a theological anthropology. And so that what you see is the love between the Father and the Son is a third, who is the Spirit. And in that you see the reality of family. That's a family. And when a man and a woman, when they join together and they produce a third, that unit, that is the primary unit of our universe. And it's foundational to life together. And so in Judeo-Christianity, what we are doing is how do we live a competent life, a good life? Well, we have to have a good enough family, and we have to make union with partners in whom we can produce life. And that has always been agreed upon by everybody. No one has ever disagreed with that idea, even if they didn't do it, or they lived as gay people, or no one ever thought, boy, the best way to organize society is to have everybody to be gay. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. And
course.
so now that it's, she's getting heat for being what you would call a traditional family, which before the 1960s was just the family, it's madness is what it is.
It seems to be. Pew Research, a reputable organization I regularly follow, says that half of U.S. adults today are married or and the share has remained relatively stable in recent years, is down significantly over the decades. Cohabitation has significantly risen, including among the growing share of unmarried persons. The share is those without a spouse or those living with a spouse is increased from 39% in 2007 to 42% in 2017. This is even higher number in Europe, where the institution of marriage is getting less and less devalued. And I'm thinking it has something to do with the devaluing of the Judeo-Christian ethos in that culture. Speak to the people who believe I need to ride the car before I buy it. I need to experiment with this individual and live with them, which is cohabitation period, before I make a lifetime commitment. Speak to us about this cohabitation phenomena.
Yeah, it's at the nature of love psychologically, even before you get to a theological world, is trust. Love is always about doing good to another person, and in that is a vulnerability. I must receive that good. And that vulnerability, for me to receive your good as an actual good, well, I have to trust you to some degree. And it's in the giving of oneself and receiving of another, which is at the basis of human sexuality. That's what we do. We get undressed, we give ourselves to another person. And what is at issue is, how valuable is that? Is it not valuable at all? Is it just really the sexual act? Well, we know that's not true, because if a woman is raped, it doesn't just hurt her body, it hurts her soul, her mind. It does great damage. Well, that means that there's something going on that's greater than just a physical encounter. And what's going on is that in our unveiling and giving ourselves one to another, we are in our most vulnerable place. And cohabitation removes trust from the equation, because trust is married to commitment. And you cannot have, if whatever degree the relationship is, whether it's a friendship or a family or a married relationship, I won't truly trust you unless you've said, I'm in it with you. And there's varying degrees of that. But in marriage, what you're saying is, I am in it with you for life. And no matter how you unveil yourself, I'm in. That's the high mark,
the high
right?
mark of it.
We don't always live up to it.
Let's take that then and bring it down to practical levels. I always use analogies as a form of communication because they stick to the mind like a tattoo. That's an analogy. Is there an analogy that can help us with the power of this interconnection between the soul and the body? The one I've heard of, and let's see, take your thought on it, is duct tape. It sticks once it sticks to something. But when it rips off and it sticks to another, and then another, and another, which is common promiscuity I'm connecting you to, it becomes less sticky. So next time the union connects with somebody, there's no longer that sticking point. That intimacy is no longer there, the power of it, the connection aspect. So that was one that helped me. There's a few others, but can you help? How would you relate that as a
It's
pastor?
interesting. I think that works. It definitely gives you the idea that you can lose something, and that's valuable. My mother has mesothelioma, which is very sad.
How is she?
She's doing well. She's recovering well. But what I learned in this whole process is that around many of our organs, especially the lung, the diaphragm, there's something called pleura. And it's a very thin membrane that covers the whole, the lung or the diaphragm, and it's a protection. It provides a cover. It's tied to it, but it's separate. And when I think about trust and commitment, it's kind of that cover that protects this very precious thing. And it can be removed, but it is, in the case of my mother, that surgery is a violent act, meaning that it has it has great consequences on her life. And I think the same is true, is that we're removing something without much thought, actually. We've decided that in the last 40, 50 years that, hey, it's great to just put our body parts together, whoever we want. Mm-hmm. And no one is thoughtfully, culturally speaking, except for Christians, Muslims, perhaps Jews, and some thoughtful philosophers, that maybe this is not a good idea. And
tearing down that ancient wall.
Yeah.
There's a reason why. Beware when you take down a fence, ask why it was there in the first place, right?
Absolutely.
Right. This was one of the things Plato was criticized on. There are a lot of brilliant things in the Republic. One of the things is the disillusionment of marriage, to make it a more communal thing. And he was attacked by it by many different fronts, because you cannot dissolve the nuclear family and expect a society to grow from it.
Yeah.
All right. So define for us marriage. And from that definition, what is the importance of the masculine and the feminine that unifies it?
Yep. And so I'm going to answer both of those. I'll do it the opposite way.
Okay.
So in the biblical definition of sexuality...
You going to go biblical on me?
Yeah, it's my world. There is no such thing as sexual orientation.
Okay.
And the way that the Bible understands relationships is sexual relationships is according to our gendered nature. Mm. And so there's men and there's women. And you look at any relationship that is ordained by God, it is about a man giving himself to a woman, or a woman giving herself to a man. And so what it means to be a man is embodied, meaning he is the initiator. He's the spark. I mean, that's literally what the sperm is. It's the spark of life. Mm. He is the one, he is the starter. And you will see that idea at the core of the masculine narrative in the Bible, all the way to the person of Jesus. And in the feminine, she is embodied. She's an embodied womb, a place that is safe and nurturing, and that protects and grows life, and is deeply connected and relational. And those things by themselves are lifeless. Mm. They're all potential. A womb by itself is just potential, and sperm by itself is just potential. It's when the two come together that a third thing can happen, something that the two by themselves can never do, which is a child. And in that masculine and feminine are those complementary pieces come together, and that is one of the foundational realities of marriage in the biblical tradition: be fruitful and multiply. Now the question becomes, well, what's the nature of this being fruitful and multiplying? Well, it's love. And not just the love between a man and a woman, but now this child. And Herman Bavinck, the language he uses is the language of the womb. And it's this idea that the womb isn't just a physical thing. It goes far beyond. It's a family. And so you're bringing this child, hopefully, into a womb of love. And that requires commitment and trust and, perseverance, and it has to be even keel. It can't just be up and down. He leaves, she leaves, new people come in. You can't form people like that. Or if you do, it can be hard. And so that is biblical marriage. Wow. And, the question that comes out of it is, well, not every couple has kids. Well, and that's true.
But the potential is there.
Yeah. And the truth is that for those who can't have kids, they're called to have spiritual children. And that every marriage is to have children, whether biological or not.
Wow. I always saw the masculine, even in mythology, which is some of my favorite readings in Norse and the Greeks and the Aztecs, as you have Father Sky, the masculine, and Gaia, the earth, receives the seed of the father. Yep. And grows from there. The vegetation and everything just to receive. It's in every major mythos, this masculine and feminine, and it comes from the male and the female that
Yeah.
God created. But then that leads us to God himself, doesn't it? And that's the question I
Yeah.
didn't prepare you for, but I want to ask you. God is not a sexual being. He's not male, but he's not female. We don't want to feminize God as a cosmic feminine deity, a
Well,
matriarch,
yeah.
right? And some have
Yeah.
tried. So let's
Well-
talk to us about the nature of God sexually.
Well, male and female are they are divine realities in which our engendered bodies are shadows. What it means to be male and female has nothing to do with penises and vaginas. Those are secondary things. God is masculine. When he speaks and the universe comes into existence, that is the masculine on display. Now, the feminine in the biblical story is not God, it's the people of God. We receive grace. We are the body that grows. We are the womb in which God brings about life. And what you see in the divine dance between the eternal God and his people is what every gendered body and every sexual relationship points to. And so it's the other way around. We are wardrobes, access to Narnia. Our bodies give us access to a deeper and better story.
This leads me then to one of the questions I want to pinpoint. What biblical passage, I know there are many, that would pinpoint to us the importance of marriage and to do a little exegy on it as we learn from the ancient scripture? Were we going to Genesis? Are you going to go to Ephesians? Or
Well, there's really three, right? You can choose the one: Genesis, Ephesians, or Matthew.
Okay. Wow. Let's go Genesis.
Okay. So I have to find it.
It's kind of
This
the hardest
is
book to
the
find.
creation mandate,
Okay.
and starting at verse 26, 126. God said, "Let us make man." And the first thing that God says is, "in our image." And whatever else that means, you talk to some scholars, and they'll say that's not Trinitarian, while people like Augustine and others said it was. I think Augustine, what it does mean is that it's communal.
Let's read the passage a
Yep.
little before I read this.
Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply."
Okay. So the institution of marriage was not man-made. It wasn't an artificial device. It was instituted by the divine, by
Yep.
God.
Be fruitful and multiply. And so that is, since for thousands of years, that has been considered the mandate for humanity. It's apart from a religious mandate. It is for all of creation, and it is the mandate that a man and a woman should come together and bring about life.
So this is one of the reasons Catholic theology stands so strongly against birth control, because you're violating this mandate that you just read to us.
Yeah, and one thing about the Catholics is that, unlike us, the Protestants, is that when they talk about something, they've been talking about it for a long, long time, and they, all of a sudden they bring about out 15 books that have been thought out. There's something to that. One of the most perilous moments for the family, for all the good that it brought about, and my wife and many people tell you the good of birth control. It did do much good for women equality, right? It moved them from being, out of one space into multiple spaces. Mm-hmm. But one of the effects of that is that now family is optional. Mm. Where before, if you had sex, you're going to have a kid. Mm-hmm. And that changed everything. Now we live in a world in which you can have sex without its purpose. And you can destroy that purpose if you like, and you can then make decisions based upon your desires and not the reality of your relationships.
The Playboy bunny
Yeah.
is a symbol, the ultimate symbol of reproduction, the bunny.
Yeah.
But it's a symbol of reproduction without responsibility.
Yeah. And that is the lack of responsibility and the purpose of family that has been divided and taken away from one another is a great challenge for our culture today.
That's powerful. From that Genesis mandate that you just read to us, why specifically does it have to be male and female? Now, we're getting into some very hot issues here. The Supreme Court recently ruled just a couple of years ago that male and female traditional marriage is not the law of the land anymore.
Yep, and because marriage points beyond itself to the nature of God and what He's doing upon the earth. And so in Ephesians, the text you spoke of before, Paul says there's this great mystery about marriage. It points to Christ and the church. And so in Christ, you have the great masculine, the rescuer, the hero. And in the church, you have the one who has been saved and made beautiful by the masculine. That is the vision of marriage. And in that, you produce new life. That is the Christian view. That has been the historic view. But
why is it the right view?
When you replace those persons, those bodies with different bodies, so a man with a man,
right.
What story is that? Well, the only story that you can tell from that is the story of self-desire. And that's the farthest as you can go. There's no cosmic story there. It is my desire for you and your desire for me. We come together and it is enclosed. It does not have the ability to produce life. It does not have the ability to point to something greater. Our institutions are always built upon telling a greater story, even if not everyone lived to it. Democracy is built upon this idea that we are made in the image of God with these inalienable rights. That's a big story. Now, we haven't lived up to it, but we're yearning to go towards it. But if you change the pieces, well, you're no longer yearning towards that great story. Marriage is meant to tell a great story. And so why it is right or wrong has to do with utility. There is utility in the heterosexual marriage, meaning it provides for society. It's the best way to raise children. Unless you are deeply politicized, everyone agrees that children do best when they have a mother and a father, and that it means something to be engendered beings, that it means something, and you have to learn and grow, and children need that. And when that is now not the high value of our society, we don't know the consequences of that.
No, I just want to say this categorically. All the peer-reviewed research for the last 6,000 years of human history, the ones specifically we've done in the last 6 decades, was what I'm referring to, have indicated the problems of families that are broken down create a society of children who don't have a structure, and those children become getting on drugs, have higher dropout rates, crime, girls getting caught up in prostitution and other areas of their life. All those stem from a brokenness of that family unit of the male and female. So the gay experiment or the marriage experiment of homosexuality is a brand new one in our culture.
Yeah, and I would like to say too that if you speak to kind of philosophical queer theorists, their goal isn't to embrace traditional marriage, meaning one man for life. They're looking to radically remake marriage that is much more open, that's much more fluid, and looks nothing like what we understand to be this kind of stable bedrock of society.
Wow.
And the question becomes, in what way does that produce good? You tell me in what way you are now institutionalizing this radical remake that we're not thinking it through. We're moving with our body, whatever it tells us to do. You tell me how that's a good idea for society.
That makes us define then what you mean by good. And marriage now has shifted to more a romantic ideal It's about love. It's about how I feel, how I felt connected to the other. And the other could be anyone else, anyone, right? Or any multiple polygamy, right? So you're challenging us to go back to the original portion of good being more than just feelings and love being more than just romance. Then
Yeah, it's so
expand on it
interesting.
for us.
You know, as a philosopher, you'll love this. I'm reading some of the Stoics and Epicureans, and this idea that there is this eternal good, and we have to find it and know it and then partner with it. You don't need to be a Christian to believe that. You go and find yourself a family that's fairly functional, that likes to be with one another, and you just throw yourself in there and you tell me if there isn't a stability and a good and an air to it that the whole world needs. And then you go find, you know, and I have many friends who are single parents, and ask them, is this the best life you could ever have? You know, is this like awesome?
Right.
And even, you know, for whatever reason that they are in that place, it's still somehow a loss. It's still somehow, it's harder. It's not, you know, it's not the best they could ever conceive of. And even if they do a great job, and many single parents do great jobs, it's still not what they dreamt about when they were 7. And so we are in desperate need to have an aim again as a culture towards the good.
Powerful.
Do you like I threw in the Epicureans?
Of course, I love it. And of course, they'll completely agree with you there. What advice do you have for single people seeking a partner?
Yep.
And I can maybe add to that the secondary question. For those who are bitter or angry at God in their latter years for not providing someone.
So I'm assuming these are Christian people.
Most of our audience is,
Yeah.
although I do have a few skeptics and some others who do write me regularly.
Well, I like that. In the biblical record, in the tradition of the scriptures, especially in the person of Jesus, singleness is given a place of great honor. Jesus himself was single. So the Savior of the world was single. And out of that, the Apostle Paul created a theological framework. And that framework was, when you are single, you are able to give your lives fully to the Lord. And that it is a calling in the same way that marriage is a calling. And so as long as you are single, and everyone is single at some point, right? That is a calling in which the primary aim is to give yourself to Christ and his mission. And that is a good thing. And Paul says, you know, when you have a family, you are pulled in different directions. Now, that isn't a bad thing, but it does mean that you cannot fully give yourself to the purposes of what God is doing upon the earth. And so I think we need to make singleness noble. And that requires both leaders like us to declare it to be noble, but then in our churches and in our communities to give singleness the same value and honor as we do marriage. And so that if someone is single, it's not like, what's wrong with you? It's like, wow, God has called you to a special purpose. And praise the Lord for that. And for those who are hurt because they have not found their partner, that is your cross. And anytime we have a cross, we must decide, will I die to myself and find new life in Jesus, or will I get angry and shake my fist at him? And we all have that.
And logically, if God is the holy, beneficent one, it is impossible for him to make a mistake. So being angry at God, although it may be an honest emotional response, is not a logical, consistent one to be angry at one who did no harm.
Right.
I mean, or evil.
Yeah, I forgot who I was talking to, but I was talking about every time I find myself in a challenge or a trial or in hurt, the way that I position myself is through I go in my head, God is good. He only does good. And what is happening to me is the best that God can do. And that reorients my whole soul. Now, I might not understand it, why my mom got cancer or someone hurt me horribly or, you know, X, Y, or Z, or, you know, but I know God does. And because I trust him and love him because of his amazing goodness, I can rest in him and know that this is good.
That's incredible to think like that. One of my cousins, his mother has always given him a problem. He's in his 40s, never married. And she keeps telling me, he expects the egg to come looking for the sperm. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
The little girl will come knocking on his door. Give some practical advice for people who are not, they're just waiting for God to just open the door and deliver the spouse. That's not how the world works, is it?
No, you heard a sermon I did on marriage several months ago. We were talking about it the other day. It is the hero Christ who rescues the church. It is the hero who makes her beautiful. It is the hero, it is the man who calls her out of her singleness into faithfulness, into covenant, into relationship. And that is the structure of life as it should be. And so every young man has to get the guts to get out of himself. You know, when men are young, they're narcissistic. They're self-loving creatures. And that is not a good thing. And the way to break it is to in right ways pursue the other, and all the stumbling and the nerves and, you know, the babbling, and to flex that muscle and to not just say, hey, let's go bowling, but to name in her what is beautiful and good and right. And to say, you know, I love hanging out with you. Let's go on a date. And I think initiative, which is masculine in my mind, I see so many young men who I walk with or who I'm friends with who have not learned that initiative is an important thing.
And speak to them then about getting the cojones, if I might say, to be able to deal with the failure if she says no. Because it is debilitating when a woman tells you, no, I just want to be your friend. Basically, your genes are not good enough to propagate the next generation for me.
Well,
they have to learn to deal with that rejection, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple things going on, I think, is that the Lord is, you have to hear that no. Like, are you overweight? Are you smelly? Are you working at, do you have a minimum wage job?
Right.
And, so she looks at you and goes, you're not offering anything.
Right.
And so get your life together and at least be on an arc going somewhere so that when she sees you, she goes, wow, not only, is he funny or good looking, but he has substance.
Somebody you could bring home to mother.
Yeah, and I have 4 boys, and our major conversation is around, what is your substance? What are you bringing to the table?
Okay.
And I don't care where you run towards, but you got to run somewhere. And I think every young man should have an aim, and I think women, in my view, are drawn to men who have an aim and a purpose, and whose life is being restructured around that aim and purpose.
Because God made the man to be the provider, protector, prophet, and king for his home, right? And she's drawn to that, not the one who has his head down and others, right?
Yeah.
Good words of encouragement there. Let's deal with the issue of a New York Times article in 2016 written by Alain de Botton. It was titled, Why You Always Marry the Wrong Person. It was the most well-read article in that year. And he wrote a book on it later on. And he deals with the myth of romance and the idol of romance in it. Let me read a portion of it and get your comment. He says, we marry to make nice feelings permanent. We imagine that marriage will help us bottle the joy we felt with the thought of proposing the first time it came to us. We marry to make such sensations permanent, but fail to see that there is no solid connection between these feelings and the institution of marriage itself. The good news is that it doesn't matter if we have married the, quote, wrong person. We mustn't abandon him or her only on the romantic ideal, which Western civilization, Western understanding is leading toward. We need to swap the romantic view for a tragic, and at points comedic, awareness that every human will frustrate, anger, annoy, madden, and disappoint us. We will, without any malice, do the same to them. There can be no end to our sense of emptiness and incompleteness. I think that comes from secularism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, but none of this is unusual or grounds for divorce. Choosing whom to commit ourselves to is merely a case of identifying which particular variety of suffering we would most likely to give ourselves to and to sacrifice ourselves for. So how do you deal with this very optimistic view of marriage?
I love it. That's it. at the foundation of marriage is not sex. At the foundation of marriage is relationship and friendship, in which sex is an important component, and it's an exclusive component to it. But my wife and I, we're not staying together because the sex is great. We're staying together because we're friends. We've committed hell or high water, and we are learning how to work through the many issues that our marriage brings to our attention. That I'm selfish, that maybe she's judgmental, all the things that come up. Marriage is about working those things out, and you cannot run from yourself. Whoever you marry, you're there, and you got a lot of problems, and your spouse is going to expose them. And the idea that marriage is really what, romance is just really textual pornography, that's really what marriage is. It's like just one mountaintop to mountaintop.
Right.
In what world is that even beautiful?
Hollywood.
Yeah. In what way is that a good? Where I never am challenged, or we never go through valleys together. There's never tension. There's no story you read that you want to be like that. You want a story in which there's challenge, there's mountaintops, there's fear of failure, there is the threat of failure, there's real things to work through, but in the end, the two cling to one another and not only stay together, but love each other to the end. Because love is not romance. Love is the intention to do good in the activity that follows. And the more sacrificial the action, the greater the love. That's love.
Isn't there a portion of love, though, that is a romantic, like Lewis talked about in the Four Loves?
Yeah, well, eros, right? You have a body that is aroused, right? But that it is good. There's nothing wrong with it. But you cannot expect that to be the fuel or the flame for a life.
The eternal flame. It shouldn't be this romantic
It
feel.
won't. It doesn't. I mean,
let's go back to
your
that.
wife has kids.
Right.
You get fat, or I get fat. Life goes up and down. Horrible things happen. You don't want to have sex, or menopause, or you get old. It's like, what is there after?
What's the glue? What's the foundation?
Yeah.
Right, and it has to be more than just the physical chemistry.
Has to be agape.
Then speak back to the single person. I know some people great people, but they don't want to connect with anybody because they haven't found the, quote, chemistry yet. They haven't found this romantic ideal, although the individual they're with, the individual I'm thinking of right now, finds a great partner, wonderful individual, but there's no chemistry, there's no romance. Should that person pursue that relationship?
Yeah, I don't, if they enjoy the person, anytime anyone asks me if they should marry a person, the answer is always yes, unless they are what Paul says, unequally yoked. If they're not of the same faith, because it causes too many problems later on. But there is absolutely nothing that can't be worked out in marriage. And you cannot conceive of the challenges you're going to have in marriage.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And the good. And so if you're with somebody and it's like you have fun, and they're a Christian, you're a Christian, or you're an atheist and they're an atheist, then jump in. All you can do is jump in.
And you'll work through it.
You work through it.
I found a recent research, I think it was a Barna research, that analyzed marriages that have been together for over 50 years. And interestingly enough, the same reasons people give for divorce, these people gave for keeping and working through.
Yep.
So anything can be worked out almost.
John Gottman, who is a researcher he's in Seattle now, but he was from the East Coast.
I was going to ask you about Gottman.
What's fundamental in a relationship is the ability to communicate and work through conflict. And either you learn how to do it and you flourish, or you always hit a brick wall and you slowly die. And that is always what is that issue.
Now, Gottman comes from a secular perspective, but his research is brilliant given the literature out there on marriage.
Oh.
But he says that, though, and I know you've done seminars on it, that one of the defining features of a breakdown, an inevitable breakdown in marriage, he labels it up to 97% analysis on that within 5 years, if there is resentment and bitterness toward the partner. As they're talking, the eyes are rolling. They're no longer, they're
he calls it contempt, yep.
As a believer, as a Christian, you believe in redemption, even at that level? If so,
Right.
how do people, this is my next question, who are in a marriage, and it's difficult, they're at each other's throats, or even worse, they no longer communicate? Give them some hope.
Yep. The goal of marital therapy in the Gottman world is that you would bring that couple back to the reason they came together in the first place. And so you have to remember the initial flame. And nearly everyone has that initial flame of, I came, he was smart, or she was pretty, or we had fun together. And it's from that place that you begin to rebuild another story. Contempt is simply seeing everything negatively, and this person is contemptible. Affection or positivity is seeing the same story, just a different perspective. And so everything is redemptive. Everything can be redeemed. If two persons, what is required is two persons who are willing to work on themselves. The reason the marriage isn't working isn't because of him or her, it's because of me. Even in adultery, even in, these, the only place where that breaks down is in cases of physical abuse. But in almost even couples come in and, one has committed adultery. Well, he or she has a very interesting and clear sin. Well, the question isn't the spouse didn't make him do that, but they are in a system in which that was made possible. Is he or she the one who didn't commit the big sin or the big crime? Are they willing to own their part of creating that system? And that answer decides whether that marriage makes it.
Yeah.
Not whether the unfaithful one is willing to deal with their stuff. They're usually so filled with shame.
Most of my adult life, I've been hearing sermons that are aimed at men, rightly so, because God went after Adam directly after the sin. But rarely have I heard one aimed at women who are living in sexless marriages, which primarily intimacy comes into the hands of the woman unless there's rape involved. And they're not giving that, so to speak, to their husbands, that powerful, intimate connection. Speak to the sexless marriages out there and the power of intimacy.
Yeah, sex usually matters more to men than women. And there's good reasons for that.
Biological reasons too, yeah.
And so it becomes another ground of intimacy. And so what a married man and a married woman have to do is that, in the Gottman language, that's a perpetual problem. I mean, she's probably not going to change her mind, and he's not going to change his mind, but yet they're in covenant one to another. And so any resolution in which it is a perpetual ongoing problem in which people have their opinions and they don't want to move will require sacrificial love. So she's going to have to move towards him, and he's going to have to move towards her. And so she's going to have to find ways of being sexually intimate, and he's going to have to find ways of celebrating the gift she gives. And so, but what's underneath that is working through it, communicating, and realizing that, it is about sex, but underneath it is what's going on? Are there games being played? Is it a way of exerting control? Is there pain from past experiences that haven't been talked about? Is he pouting and being passive? Get rid of all the games and start communicating about what's really going on. And often there's a current underneath that needs to be talked about.
Okay.
And once that starts talking about, the bodies open up. And even if that's not true, moving towards one another is what marriage is all about.
I heard a saying that goes, men give affection to receive sex, women give sex to get affection.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's some truth to the biological connection between that and the abilities to find meaning together. In his book, I didn't mention it here, but I've read it almost 3 times now, the 12 Rules of Life, Jordan Peterson. He mentions that if you're constantly in an argument with your spouse, the person you're with, and you're always winning, that's a guaranteed failure of the marriage. No one wants to live in a perpetual marriage where they're always feeling as a loser. Beware of that winning aspect in arguments. Speak to the couples about how to deal properly with each other.
I've thought more about this than just about anything in my current life, not just in marriage, but in relationships.
Okay.
What we have to understand is that when we're communicating or arguing about something, what is being negotiated is not just who wins or loses, but the relationship itself. And so I'm reading Emotional Intelligence by, I forgot the guy's name, but the original book on emotional intelligence.
So many now, right?
It's all Gottman stuff. He takes all of Gottman's research and kind of puts it into the workplace, puts it into community. And when we're communicating, if you and I are arguing about whether it should be X or Y, well, the question is, am I giving space for you to be heard? And am I slowing down enough to really get in your shoes, to go until it makes sense to me that you think it should be Y, and to be willing to have the humility to go, oh, that makes sense to me, like why you think that. And then for you to do the same for X. And then after we hear one another and there's respect, what we want to do is not win or lose, but partner together to figure it out.
And that goes back to the Ephesians mandate, isn't it? That men desire on the deepest level for respect, and women desire on the deepest level to be cherished. And if you can't provide that in an argument, doesn't matter whether you win or lose it, right?
Yep. And so what I always tell couples, and what we try to do in my marriage is, okay, so we have this challenge. We see it very differently. We're together. This marriage is more important than this challenge. So somehow we have to get from A to B. How are we going to do it?
Would you say then that there are some issues in marriage that just can't be resolved, just let them go? Or you have to resolve everything and she has to agree with you?
It's about 66% that Gottman has measured it, that he calls perpetual problems that are unsolvable, that they keep coming up. And so it's not that you just don't deal with them, but you understand that what you're negotiating is not an answer, but the relationship itself.
Okay.
And so you're just, okay, it's coming up again. What can we do temporarily to solve it and to love one another?
Okay.
And in that way,
the relationship becomes more important than the actual argument. The question I asked earlier, and I want to get close to the finish line here, on the question of headship, which I started off with the Supreme Court nominee, in marriage, culture tells us it's complete egalitarianism. Christian culture tells us it's a form of egalitarianism, but also complementarianism. There's some disagreement there among Christians, legitimate disagreements. Where do you stand, and how do you deal with it?
I was just talking about this morning. I think in the family, it is clear that it means something to be male. It just means something. My body is the initiator. I'm stronger than my wife, so that probably means I need to protect her. My voice means something to my boys that my wife's voice does not.
Yeah, my father used to scare us just with his voice. My mother needed the belt.
And that means something. And then there's things that my wife does in which my boys, when they are sad, they go to her. When, even if I'm home, if they're hungry, they text her at work. And so that means something. And so I think people can work it out in a variety of ways. Like, I think women can work, obviously, and men can stay home if they want to. But it means something to be a man, it means something to be a woman. And I think that mostly what's happening is that men are abdicating their position of not authority per se, but of spiritual leadership. Like, where is it at where, men are laying down their lives for their wives and their kids and really doing all they can to make sure that they're flourishing? And then in response, women responding to that in what the Bible calls submission, but really you could just think of it as agreement. Like, I love it. That's what it's like. I love it. Amen. It's beautiful. What wife doesn't want a man who serves her and lays his life for her, lays his life down for her? Every woman wants that. And so no one disagrees about that. And if that's true, then what every man wants is, as you say, is respect, or to be honored for laying down his life. And that's what submission is biblically.
Step back and let him lead.
Yeah.
Let him hold the menu.
Yeah.
For a bit. Let him drive.
Yeah.
It makes him feel like a leader.
Right. I will say one more thing about that, though. The reason that it's so sticky is because misogyny or hatred of women has been such an issue in our culture. Okay. And so it's being mixed up. And it's being mixed up in where some men think, I want it to be 1942. And it's like, bro, that was wrong then. It's wrong now. And that Bible says nothing about that, so stop it. But there needs to be a reclaiming of the true story of the hero, the man who wins over his bride.
Not tyrannical
Yeah,
rule.
for
right?
sure. Yeah.
Any word of hope for people who have gone through the married path and unfortunately have the D on their life, the divorce?
Yeah, I saw that question and I thought, hope. Well, I was listening to Dallas Willard talk about divorce, and he said, when I was very young, I was against it every time. And he said, what I realized as I got older is that, of course, divorce is an awful thing, but there are worse things. And he said, what I realized is that some relationships need to end. And I have an expansive view of Paul's reasons for ending a marriage. I think, the things he gives of abandonment and adultery are both physical and spiritual realities. And I think some people have been abandoned spiritually and emotionally and sexually for decades while their spouse sleeps right next to them. And they live in the hell of aloneness and, whatever else is going on. And so I think there's reason for divorce. I think there should be less divorce than there is. But divorce is no different to me than any other kind of very sad result of the fall. And it makes no one different. Like, I'm a result of the fall. I do many things as a result of the fall. So welcome to the club, right? And I disagree with people like Piper who say that divorce is it's like you're done in many ways around leadership with divorce. I don't see that. It's not biblical. It's not in the scriptures. And so what I would say is mourn and grieve, because it is sad and it will be a wound that you carry the rest of your life. But get up and live, because God desires that you would know the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And there's nothing that has happened that can stop God doing all that he plans to do through you and in you, because that's the nature of the gospel.
Those words are very poignant. Pastor Ron, thank you for your time.
I love you, Caldoun. Thanks for having me. Thanks for watching.
It is a pleasure.
Bless you, brother.